I mentioned the upcoming series of sermons out of Colossians with a little bit of regret, and that is the regret is that this is the last sermon in the series on temptations that can ruin your new year. And frankly, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's been a kind of a fun series. I got to talk about complaining. I got to talk about being overly critical. Last week, I got to talk about lying, which I regretted immediately after the church service when I was joking around with people about, I mean, if you know me, you know that that's part of my humor. I like to joke about fibbing, and everybody was like, "Ooh, Pastor, you can't say that." And didn't you hear? I heard a sermon about that recently, so I kind of regretted that sermon, but it's probably for my own good. I may regret this sermon as well. Today's topic is about gossip. And you would be amazed how hard it is to preach on gossip, and particularly how hard it is to illustrate a sermon on gossip without slandering all of your friends. I mean, I was trying to think, who can I pick on? And I'm thinking, well, anybody, it'd be kind of like last week when I didn't want to lie in the sermon about lying. I don't want to gossip in the sermon about gossiping. And so I was thinking about it, and I decided I need to tell you a lie in order to do this. So I'm not going to pick on anybody in this congregation because none of us gossip, right? We're so mature spiritually that there's no gossip in this church. And so I have to go back to my last church to get an example of gossip. And we had this one woman in the church you would not believe. And I know you think I'm joking, so I brought a picture. Shannon, can you put the photo up? Well, Mary, in case you can't read the text. Well, Mary, I was shocked to see Susie, is it Susie? Yes, Susie chewing gum during church. You ever heard, like when we were kids, we used to nudge each other, look at what so-and-so's doing, right? Just as kids, adults don't do that. And then I saw Billy hiding a comic book in his Bible. And then Timmy. Y'all know I heard Timmy had a 6-figure salary. I saw him, he put a penny in the offering. Gossip, right? None of us would ever do that. We can laugh about it because we've all been there, right? I can remember as a kid, I don't know if you ever did this. There was a period of time where I went to an Episcopalian high school, and one of the things we did is we had chapel every week. And in chapel, you have to walk up the front. They had like an altar up front. We took communion differently than we take it here. You would walk up to the front. You would kneel at the front in front of everybody, and in lines, you'd take communion, right? You know what all the kids were doing? We were back there. Look at what she's wearing. Look at what that guy's wearing. Look at those high tops, We were critiquing everybody's fashion sense. Little gossip. We can joke about it, but here's the thing. The sad truth is that there is gossip in the church. Did you see? Did you hear? Did you, can you imagine? And sometimes we disguise it. We like to disguise our gossip. Sometimes we disguise it as a prayer request. Y'all know we need to be praying for him. And then somebody's like, why? And they get the big bug eyes. Why are we going to be praying for him? Well, I heard. Did you hear? We need to pray for their marriage. He's spending an awful lot of time with so-and-so. Now, I don't know that anything's going on, but far be it from me to judge, right? And we gossip in church, and it often goes just like that. We disguise it. Sometimes we gossip in the neighborhood. When I was a kid, there was this one house in our neighborhood that everybody's afraid of. And it's because we knew that the adult son who was living at home in that house had been to jail. Now, I don't know what he went to jail for. He could have gone to jail for feeding the homeless in the park, like somebody got arrested for last week. I forget where that was. But that wasn't the rumor that was floating around. As far as us kids were concerned, we had a Charles Manson living right in our neighborhood. He had murdered people. He had cut up the bodies. You know, they were probably kids from the neighborhood stored in his garage. I mean, we didn't play in their yard. We didn't cut through their driveway to get to some other kid's house. Halloween came around, and y'all know how much I love candy. I did not trick or treat at that house. Because you do not trick or treat at the house that Charles Manson lives in. So we gossip in the neighborhood. We gossip in church. We gossip in the neighborhood. You know where one of the most tempting places to gossip is, and this is hard, online. Y'all know about gossip on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, all those things. All it takes is that one little click, right? There's an old quote: "A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth even gets out of bed." That's so true with social media. You know, that quote originated in like the 1700s. It's often attributed to Mark Twain. Funny thing about that quote, it's often attributed to Mark Twain, but Mark Twain's not the originator. It started with Jonathan Swift and then was quoted in sermons and popularized by Charles Spurgeon. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth even gets out of bed. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, snap of our fingers, the push of a button, we spread often false gossip all the way around the world. And it goes about Hollywood celebrities, sports stars. The big thing in the last year was politicians. Just, oh, but it's fun. Well, the fact is, it may be fun, but it also hurts. I bet many of us in the room have been stung with the pain of gossip at some point in our lives. Maybe you lost a friendship over something somebody said that you said. Maybe you were embarrassed and lost face yourself because someone spoke something untrue about you. Maybe you supported the wrong cause because somebody else shared a link that they shouldn't have shared and didn't have any idea where the truth was, or maybe you had somebody that you care deeply about slandered and talked about and hurt. Gossip hurts. It destroys. We don't want to be a place where there's any gossip, not just in our church, but in our neighborhoods, in our offices, in our families. Families are bad about gossip too. I don't even want to get into that because it might get too personal. But here's the thing. We often think about gossip as hurting the person who's being gossiped about, and it does. But gossip also hurts the person spreading the gossip. It hurts the person speaking it. And maybe the most difficult one, because there's not a whole lot you can do about other people gossiping about you. I mean, they're going to say what they're going to say, and you can't really control it. And there's not a whole lot you can do about that. It's pretty easy to do something about not spreading gossip. You can just shut up. You don't have to say everything that comes into your mind. Whether it's true or not, you can just be quiet and refuse to spread. But you know what else it hurts? And this is where I want to focus a little bit of attention this morning. It hurts the person who hears it. Even if you're not a conduit to spread it, it hurts you just to hear it. You may start thinking about somebody differently than you should. You may resent something. You may keep it inside, but it can still hurt you. And it occurs to me that we can't do anything about people who are going to talk about us. We cannot talk about others, but what do you do? Is there anything we can do about people who are telling us about somebody else? And so I was looking into this some this week, and I came across a study written by a group of psychologists that claim that there's one question when someone is spreading gossip and they're talking to you talking junk about somebody else. There's one question you can ask that will stop it in its tracks. I don't know if this is true. This could violate the sermon from last week, because I don't know if they actually studied this or if they just made up the statistic, but they said that in the article, it said that if you ask this one question, it will stop the gossip in its track 98% of the time. You take the statistic for what it's worth. In my experience, it works. And that question is, when someone's telling you a juicy little tidbit about your neighbor, you ask, why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this? And if that sounds too aggressive, there's a corollary question you can ask that sounds a little bit softer. And that is, have you spoken to so-and-so about this? And so-and-so being the person that's being slandered. Have you spoken to them about this? And the answer then, if it's really gossip, the answer is always the same. The answer is, well, no. And then your answer is, maybe you should. Because the principle is, if it's important enough to tell me, then it's important enough to go to them. If it's not important enough to go to them, then you probably shouldn't be telling me. So someone comes to you with gossip, here's what you're going to do. You're going to say, have you spoken to that person about this? And when they say no, then you say, maybe you should. And I was reading this article and I was thinking, gosh, that is really good advice. I think it works. I think it's worked in my own life. And then I was thinking, it sounds awfully familiar. I think I've heard this somewhere before. And then the light bulb went off. Jesus. Not the curse word, but the person. So you have to clarify that these days. Jesus said the same thing. And so if you have a Bible, open it to Matthew chapter 18. He gave this exact same advice. Matthew chapter 18. If you're using the church Bibles, I'll give you a page number. It's on page 799 in the church Bibles. I'm going to read just a few verses beginning with verse 15. But before I read the verses, you need to know this. So there's a little bit of context which actually sets this in the gossip mode a little bit. The context is this. So Matthew's writing his whole book as an attempt to tell us more about Jesus, who he is, what he taught, all this kind of stuff, to sort of prove that he is the Savior that we all need. And right before this, he highlights a couple of sins that are super important. Right before this, he talks about the problem of jealousy and people that we're jealous about and preventing jealousy. And he talks about people maybe within the church that have gone astray. I would submit to you that those are the two most likely people that we like to gossip about. People that we're jealous of and people that we think have gone astray. Did you hear what, I think I saw that so-and-so was out drinking or this, that, because, well, I'll get to why in a minute, but I think those are the two groups of people that we're most likely to try to slander. And after talking about those two things, Jesus says this. Verse 15, Matthew chapter 18. He says, if your brother or sister sins, if they've gone astray, or if you think they've gone astray, and there's also an implication here, and if you think it's important enough to say something to somebody. Now, I think there are lots of times when our brothers or sisters or friends or neighbors sin, and we probably ought to just shut up about it and move on. See no evil, hear no evil kind of thing. But there are times when somebody does something and you know that God is calling you to say something. And I think that's implied here. So if your brother or sister sins, and if you need to say something, it says, go and point out their fault to your pastor. No. To your small group. Y'all know why I started with to your pastor? Because y'all all do that. What am I supposed to do? To your pastor, to your small group, to your neighbor, to your spouse, none of that. Go and point out their fault just between the two of you. In other words, have you spoken to so-and-so about this? No? Maybe you should. If they listen to you, you've won them over. If they will not listen, and I got to be honest, sometimes I think you have to skip to the second step. There are some people that we're so intimidated by that we really can't go to one-on-one. I think the principle is the same. Drag a trusted friend along. Sometimes you have to take somebody just for the courage, or maybe even just for the witness. Right? And this is Jesus' second step. We'd be 1,000 times better off if people could do either of these first two steps first. Sometimes it's dangerous to go straight to the person. You need somebody else just for safety reasons, right? Just wanted to put that out there. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, you got to tell it to the church. Now, this part may not apply to gossip in general, because this is written now specifically about church discipline, and it's not necessarily hitting our topic. But if it persists, take it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, then you got to treat them as you would a pagan and a tax collector. A lot of people think this means kick them out and don't talk to them. What's interesting is, how did Jesus treat pagans and tax collectors? He loved them. You're supposed to love them. But you still have to put a stop to the gossip. And you still have to confront them. So this doesn't mean like kick them out of the church and give them the boot. I mean, maybe it means they can't come. There are circumstances where someone does have to be asked to leave a church. I've been in ministry now for, I don't even want to tell you how long, but I've been in ministry now for a while. Twice I've had to ask someone to leave, and both because they were being sexually aggressive towards other people, and they refused to stop. But it's unusual. It's unusual. Most times this can be reconciled. A lot of sins we can just, you speak your piece and you go on. But if there are levels that this acknowledges where it's so bad that you just have to ask them to leave, but you still love them, you still care about them, you still let them know that you're in their corner. And I was thinking about these things. You know, you read something like this and you have to ask yourself some questions. Do we as Christians, do we want to be people who tear others down, or do we want to be people that build them up? Do we want to obscure the image of God in one another, or do we want to highlight the image of God in one another and help it to be more visible? Because that's the choice we make when we deal actually with all 4 of these sins, with being chronic complainers, chronic criticizers, liars, not just liars, but living a lie, becoming a liar. It's more than just telling lies that I was talking about last week. Or gossiping. Or participating in gossip. You know, all 4 of these things are things that we do to kind of push others down. But as Christians, as a church, we don't want to push each other down. We want to lift each other up. We don't want to criticize the sin in your life. We want to lift up the light in your life. That's who we want to be as a people, as individuals. It's so fundamental to the gospel. I was thinking about all 4 of these temptations are kind of sins of the mouth, right? They're things you do by saying you criticize, you complain, you lie, and you gossip. And I was thinking about that, and I was reminded that Jesus in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, he says that these kinds of mouth sins betray something more deeper. He betrays a condition of the heart. The quote is, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so if we're overly engaged in being critical and complaining all the time, and lying and gossiping, it doesn't just reveal that we're complaining and lying and criticizing and gossiping. It reveals that there's something, it reveals something about the sin that's staying on our hearts. Jesus says that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. It's a heart problem. Ultimately, gossip is a heart problem. And I think even at the root of that, it's an insecurity issue. It's an because when we gossip, what we do is we lift ourselves up by putting others down. So when we say, "Did you see Susie chewing gum in church last week?" We're putting her down so that us not chewing gum looks better. "Did you see Billy not reading his Bible, faking it with a comic book?" I would never do that. So we lift ourselves up by putting Billy down. "Did you see Timmy put a penny in the offering plate? I put in a dime. I'm 10 times better than Billy." Or Timmy, or whoever it was. I can't even remember. Timmy. The heart problem is that it's an insecurity problem, and we feel like in order for us to be raised up, we have to put others down. I am strong because they are weak. Right? But you know what the gospel says? The gospel says, "I'm weak, but he is strong." You see the difference? The temptation, I think, in all kinds of areas of our life is to think that for us to be lifted up, others have to go down, that we have to cover up our weakness with somebody else's worst weakness. But the gospel says, "I'm weak, I admit it, I need help, but he is strong." But he is strong. The world says you're small and ugly and you're unredeemable. God says you're created in the image of God, that you don't need to put others down to be valued and respected and to be worthy of honor. Your worthiness of honor comes from the fact that you're created in the image of God. You were created for glory, for beauty. You were created with a purpose. The word, Scripture says that I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you. We're created for that kind of stuff. We're not created to be broken and low and discarded. We're not created to be abused or to be slandered or to slander. And in that knowledge, when we begin to realize that it's in God's image that we were created, and it is because of that that we have dignity and deserve respect and honor and all that kind of stuff, then we realize we don't have to put others down to be accepted because we're already accepted by Jesus Christ. We don't have to be better than that person or this person to be the person God created us to be. In God's economy, we are unconditionally loved. And it's exemplified and enfleshed in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So if in this series of sermons, if you've realized at all that you have a problem with being overly complaining, if you've realized at all that you have a problem with being chronically critical, if you've realized at all, I don't have an alliteration for lying, if you've realized at all that you have lying lips, see? If you've realized at all that you have a problem with gossip, what I would encourage you to do, I think the ultimate cure is to realize that you're created in the image of God. That God sent his only Son to live and die on your behalf. He already did it. It's not like he might. It's not like if you live up to it that he'll come through, but he already did it. It's done. It's spoken for. Finished. The end. Our choice is really just whether we're going to accept it and enjoy it, or whether we're going to fight it. My encouragement to you this morning is accept it, enjoy God's love, and let it set you free from that comparison game that causes so much sin and shame. Amen. Will you join with me in prayer?